The noise that never heard me, the era of UNDRSTMATION. They talk. God, how they talk. They fill the air with opinions, with laughter that echoes too loudly, with confidence borrowed from crowds that think the same way they do. They mistake volume for value. They mistake attention for authority. They mistake noise for power. And in all that noise, I was there, breathing, watching, learning. I wasn't absent. I wasn't incapable. I wasn't lost. I was simply unheard. They never noticed me because they never looked for anything that didn't demand to be seen. They never listened for anything that didn't beg to be heard. In a world addicted to shouting, silence is invisible. In a world that worships spectacle, restraint looks like weakness. So they ignored me. They talked over me. They laughed past me. They walked through me like I was air. And I let them, not because I couldn't speak, but because I chose not to. They spoke. I listened. I remembered. This world loves noise. It rewards the loud, the reckless, the desperate performers screaming for approval. It crowns those who sell confidence better than they sell truth. It lifts voices that echo what everyone already believes and crushes anything that sounds different, quieter, deeper. I learned that early. If you don't announce yourself, they assume you don't matter. If you don't interrupt, they assume you have nothing to say. If you don't fight for attention, they assume you don't deserve it. So I became what they feared the least, a shadow. A shadow standing in a room full of mirrors. They looked everywhere and saw only themselves. Reflections stacked on reflections. Egos bouncing off polished surfaces. Everyone obsessed with being seen, no one capable of seeing. And there I was, still unreflected, unnoticed. They mistook my quiet for emptiness. They thought silence meant submission. They thought restraint meant fear. They thought patience meant defeat. They were wrong. But at the time, their wrongness didn't feel poetic. It felt heavy. It felt like being erased while still breathing, like existing only as background noise to other people's lives, like screaming internally while the world clapped for someone louder. I felt it in the way they smirked when I didn't respond. I felt it in the way they spoke about me instead of to me. I felt it in the way my presence never shifted the room. Mockery doesn't always come as laughter. Sometimes it comes as indifference. Sometimes it comes as the casual certainty that you don't matter enough to attack. They didn't hate me, they dismissed me, and that cuts deeper. They underestimated me not because they knew my limits, but because they never bothered to imagine I had any depth at all. To them, I was a footnote, a background character, a silhouette without a story. I watched them rise on fragile confidence. I watched them boast about victories they hadn't earned. I watched them mistake popularity for strength and cruelty for dominance. They built their empires on noise. I built nothing, not yet. Because while they were performing, I was observing. While they were proving themselves, I was studying the rules of the game they didn't even realize they were playing. They spoke. I listened. I remembered every joke at my expense, every dismissal wrapped in a smile. Every time my ideas were ignored until repeated by a louder mouth. Every time my silence was treated like consent. I remembered the tone. I remembered the timing. I remembered the pattern. Because that's what silence does when it's forced to endure. It sharpens memory. They thought I lacked ambition because I didn't announce it. They thought I lacked hunger because I didn't bare my teeth. They thought I lacked rage because I didn't explode. They never considered that maybe I was storing it. Silence isn't empty. Silence is storage. It collects moments. It preserves wounds. It keeps receipts. I learned the rhythm of this world by standing still inside it. I learned who spoke when they were afraid, who laughed when they felt threatened, who got louder when their authority started slipping. Noise reveals insecurity. Volume exposes cracks. The loudest voices were always the most fragile. The ones who couldn't stand a pause. The ones who filled every gap with sound because silence would force them to confront themselves. I became fluent in those gaps. While they fought for the spotlight, I stood just outside it where the truth lives, where masks slip, where people show you who they are when they think no one important is watching. They didn't know I was watching. They never see the shadow until it moves. There were moments, don't misunderstand me, when the weight of being unseen almost broke me, when I questioned whether my silence was discipline or cowardice, whether my restraint was strength or surrender. There were nights when I wondered if I should scream just to prove I existed, if I should shatter the quiet and demand recognition like everyone else. But then I watched what happened to those who did. I watched them burn themselves out chasing applause. I watched them say too much, reveal too much, expose too much. I watched their noise turn into a liability, and I stayed quiet because I wasn't waiting to be heard. I was waiting to understand. They spoke. I listened. I remembered. I remembered how quickly respect evaporates when you over-explain, how power weakens when it begs to be acknowledged, how authority dissolves the moment it needs validation. They thought I had nothing because I showed nothing. They were wrong. I had patience. I had awareness. I had an edge they couldn't see because it didn't glitter. I was becoming something they didn't have language for, and still they mocked. They joked about my silence. They called it awkward. They called it strange. They called it irrelevant. They turned my restraint into a punchline, my distance into a flaw. They thought I was passive. They never asked why I wasn't reacting. They never asked what kind of person remains calm in a world addicted to reaction. They never asked what grows in the dark. I let them believe the story they told themselves. I let them assume I was harmless. I let them mistake my stillness for a lack of intention, because underestimation is a gift. It lowers guards, it dulls instincts, it creates blind spots. They built those blind spots themselves. Every time they overlooked me, they reinforced the illusion. Every time they dismissed me, they fed their own future shock. I didn't interrupt their narrative. I memorized it. I memorized how they define strength, how they worship dominance, how they confuse aggression with power, how they fear anything they can't predict. And silence is unpredictable. Silence doesn't reveal its next move. Silence doesn't announce its intentions. Silence lets others expose theirs. They spoke. I listened. I remembered. This wasn't weakness. This was reconnaissance. This was the foundation. Because every empire falls the same way, by underestimating what it refuses to understand. And I was becoming the thing they refused to see, still standing, still breathing, still silent, a shadow among mirrors, and one day that shadow would move. I learned early that silence scares no one. At first, I learned early that the world does not fear quiet people. It fears loud ones. It rewards loud ones. It listens to loud ones. Silence to them is harmless. That lesson didn't come gently. It wasn't philosophical. It was taught the hard way. I spoke once. I remember that. I spoke when I thought honesty mattered, when I believed words had weight just because they were true. I spoke when I didn't yet understand how power works, when I still believed the world was fair enough to hear a calm voice. And I paid for it. Speaking brought consequences, not dramatic ones, not heroic ones, small, cruel consequences, the kind that teach you to adjust. The kind that make you quieter without ever telling you to be. Every time I spoke out of turn, I was corrected. Every time I spoke honestly, I was dismissed. Every time I spoke with emotion, I was weakened. They didn't say, "Be silent." They said worse things. They said, "That's not important." They said, "You're overreacting." They said, "No one asked." And those words do something to you. They train you, slowly, methodically, like water carving stone. You learn when it's safe to speak. You learn when it's smarter not to. You learn which truths cost too much. So I learned. I learned that silence keeps you out of trouble. I learned that silence keeps you from being targeted. I learned that silence makes people forget you're even there. And sometimes that's survival. There were moments when my voice trembled, not because I was afraid, but because I knew what would happen if I used it. I knew the punishment waiting on the other side of honesty. The eye rolls, the laughter, the subtle tightening of power around my throat. So I swallowed words, one by one, not because I lacked them, but because I learned what they cost. Silence became my shelter, not comfort, shelter, a place to hide when speaking felt like stepping into fire without armor. They don't tell you this when you're young. They don't explain that the world doesn't crush everyone the same way. Some people get applause for being loud. Others get punished for being visible at all. I was the second kind, so I adapted. I watched instead of speaking. I listened instead of arguing. I observed instead of reacting, and something interesting happened. The quieter I became, the safer I felt. No one challenged me if I didn't challenge them. No one attacked what they barely noticed. No one tried to dominate what didn't compete. Silence became my camouflage. I blended into the background, not because I wanted to disappear, but because disappearing kept me intact. It kept my edges sharp instead of worn down by constant conflict. They thought I was passive. I was learning where the blows come from. Speaking was dangerous. Silence was neutral. Silence was allowed, so I chose aloud. I learned how to sit in rooms and let others fill the air with their egos. I learned how to nod without agreeing, how to lower my gaze without lowering my standards, how to keep my thoughts locked behind my teeth. And every time I stayed silent, I survived another moment. That survival adds up. Silence stopped being a reaction. It became a reflex. I didn't flinch when ignored. I didn't break when overlooked. I adjusted. Because when you grow up unheard, you don't stop having thoughts. You just stop wasting them on people who have proven they don't listen. Silence didn't feel powerful then. It felt necessary. It felt like armor you wear under your skin, invisible, heavy, always on. They didn't see the cost of it. They only saw the result. A quiet presence, a restrained posture, a person who didn't interrupt or demand. They thought I was easy. They didn't see the restraint as discipline. They saw it as submission. They assumed silence meant agreement. That quiet meant compliance. They were wrong. Silence was never surrender. It was containment. It was the decision not to spill everything at once, not to expose my center to people who would stab it just to see if it bleeds. Every word I didn't say stayed inside me. Every reaction I didn't give hardened. Every emotion I swallowed sharpened. You don't lose strength by holding it in. You concentrate it. They never taught me how to use my voice. They taught me when not to, and that lesson carved something dangerous into me. I learned how to endure. I learned how to wait. I learned how to let moments pass without revealing what they did to me. That kind of conditioning changes you. It makes you alert. It makes you patient. It makes you careful with who gets access to your thoughts. It also makes you cold. Not cruel, cold, because warmth invites contact, and contact invites damage, so I kept my distance. I learned that silence doesn't scare anyone at first. People relax around it, they underestimate it. They assume it has no teeth, they speak freely. They expose themselves, they forget you're listening. That's the part no one warns them about. Silence listens. While they talked, I cataloged. While they bragged, I measured. While they vented, I learned where they were weakest. Silence gave me time. Time to understand how people really are when they think they're safe. When they believe no one important is paying attention, they never saw me as a threat. And that was the safest place to be, because threats get watched, threats get managed, threats get eliminated, silence gets ignored, and ignored things grow. I didn't become quiet because I was fragile. I became quiet because I was being shaped. Conditioned by consequence, sharpened by neglect, they trained me without realizing it. Every time they punished honesty, they taught me restraint. Every time they ignored my voice, they taught me observation. Every time they dismissed my presence, they taught me patience. And patience is dangerous in the wrong hands. Silence stopped hurting after a while. It stopped feeling like loss. It started feeling like control. I decided when to speak. I decided what to reveal. I decided who deserved access to my thoughts. That decision gave me something most people never develop. An inner world no one could touch. They couldn't mock what they couldn't hear. They couldn't attack what they couldn't see. They couldn't corrupt what they didn't know existed. Silence protected me, but it also stored something. Every unspoken word didn't disappear. It waited. It settled. It layered itself over the last one, pressure building slowly, quietly, relentlessly, like a blade being forged without sparks. At the time, I didn't know what it would become. I only knew it kept me alive. It kept me intact. It kept me from breaking in front of people who would enjoy watching it happen. So I kept choosing silence. Again and again and again, not as fear, as strategy. Because one day I knew without fully understanding how I wouldn't need to speak often. I wouldn't need to explain myself. I wouldn't need to fight for space. One day, the silence itself would do the talking, and when that day came, it wouldn't sound gentle. They confused my stillness for surrender. They mistook my stillness for defeat. That was their first mistake. In a world addicted to movement, stillness looks like weakness. In a society trained to measure power by noise and aggression, patience feels like retreat. If you're not pushing, shouting, clawing for space, they assume you've already lost. So when I stood still, they smiled. They thought I had given up. They thought I had accepted my place beneath them. They thought silence meant I had nothing left. They laughed. And I watched. I watched as their confidence grew reckless, as their voices got louder, sharper, more cruel. I watched them mistake momentum for control and cruelty for strength. I watched them grow comfortable, arrogant, careless. Because nothing feeds arrogance faster than a target that doesn't fight back. They began to circle me like predators convinced the hunt was already over. They nipped. They provoked. They tested me with insults disguised as jokes and dominance disguised as confidence. They wanted a reaction. They wanted proof that I was afraid. I gave them nothing. They laughed. I watched. They called my restraint cowardice. They told themselves stories to justify it. Stories where I was weak, where I was broken, where my silence was proof that they had already won. People love stories where they're the hero, so they cast me as the defeated villain before I ever made a move. And that made them bold. They stepped closer. They spoke louder. They grew crueler. Because patience looks like surrender to those who have never mastered it. Because waiting feels pointless to those who only understand force. They couldn't imagine choosing stillness. They could only imagine failing into it. So they mistook my control for collapse. They mistook discipline for fear. They mistook my quiet for an open invitation. They laughed. I watched. I watched patterns form, who spoke first when challenged, who barked the loudest when threatened, who attacked others to distract from their own insecurity. Noise has patterns. Arrogance has rhythms. Recklessness leaves trails. They didn't hide it well. They didn't know they had to. Why would they? They thought I was already dead. They treated me like an obstacle already cleared, like a body on the battlefield they didn't need to check for breath. They stepped over me confident, careless, convinced the danger had passed. Predators do that. They see something unmoving and assume it's finished. They don't consider that stillness can be deliberate, that restraint can be tactical, that silence can be loaded. They mistook a sleeping dragon for a corpse. They laughed. I watched. I watched how power made them sloppy, how dominance inflated their egos until they forgot the basics. They spoke without thinking. They threatened without planning. They exposed themselves with every unnecessary display of strength. They didn't realize how much they were giving away. Every insult revealed their insecurity. Every boast exposed their fear. Every reckless move showed me where they would break, and they kept going. They escalated because silence frustrates people who need control. It denies them validation. It refuses to play their game. So they pushed harder, louder, crueler, desperate to force a reaction. They thought pressure would crack me. They didn't realize pressure was my environment. I had lived there longer than they had lived in comfort. They laughed. I watched. I watched alliances form and fracture. I watched who followed strength and who followed noise. I watched who crumbled the moment attention shifted away from them. I memorized their tells. Some people reveal everything when they think they're winning. They stop guarding their words. They stop masking their intentions. They stop preparing for resistance because they believe none exists. They believed none existed in me. So they showed me everything. I saw who relied on intimidation, who relied on numbers, who relied on reputation instead of ability. I saw which threats were empty and which ones trembled beneath the surface. I didn't interrupt their performance, I studied it, because silence creates space, and space makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people overcompensate. They fill the void with excess. That excess becomes weakness. They didn't understand that. They thought stillness was stagnation. They thought waiting meant falling behind. They thought restraint meant a lack of ambition. They couldn't imagine strength that doesn't announce itself. So they mocked mine. They laughed. I watched. They thought my calm was compliance. They spoke down to me. They tested boundaries they assumed I didn't have. They crossed lines because they believed there would be no consequence. They believed silence meant permission. It doesn't. Silence means calculation. Every second I stayed still, I learned more about them than they would ever learn about me. Every moment they wasted posturing was a moment I spent understanding the battlefield they were too arrogant to map. They never asked themselves why I wasn't reacting. They never questioned why I didn't flinch. They never wondered what kind of person remains composed while being underestimated. They just kept laughing. They laughed louder as their confidence swelled, louder as their cruelty sharpened, louder as their recklessness took over, because laughter is a shield. It hides fear. It disguises doubt. It convinces the speaker as much as the audience. They needed to believe I was nothing. They needed that belief to justify their behavior, so they repeated it, out loud, often, aggressively. They laughed. I watched. I watched them burn bridges they thought they'd never need. I watched them alienate allies in their hunger for dominance. I watched them expose cracks they didn't know existed. I watched impatience rot their judgment. Patience looks passive to impatient minds. Waiting feels unbearable to those who confuse movement with progress. They rush, they lunge, they strike before they're ready, and they struck early. Too early, they didn't realize my stillness wasn't hesitation. It was timing. I wasn't frozen, I was coiled. Every insult tightened the spiral, every dismissal added tension, Every laugh compressed something inside me that wasn't rage, but focus, cold focus. They assumed anger would make me sloppy. They didn't realize silence had already burned it away. I wasn't emotional, I was deliberate. They laughed. I watched. I watched them underestimate consequences. I watched them assume superiority without testing it. I watched them believe their own myths. People intoxicated by power stop asking questions. They stop verifying assumptions. They stop preparing for resistance. They didn't prepare for me because they didn't believe I existed as a threat, and that belief made them predictable. They spoke in patterns. They attacked in patterns. They defended in patterns. Patterns are weaknesses waiting to be exploited. I cataloged every one. They mistook my restraint for submission. They mistook my silence for consent. They mistook my patience for defeat. They never considered the alternative, that I was choosing this, that I was allowing them to grow careless, that I was letting them reveal themselves fully before I moved. Predators don't fear stillness until it moves. They laughed. I watched. And while they were laughing, something shifted, not in them, in me. I stopped feeling the sting of their mockery. It lost its edge. It became information, data, noise to be filtered, not absorbed. Their laughter no longer hurt. It clarified. It showed me exactly how far they were willing to go when they thought there was no resistance. It showed me the depth of their cruelty and the shallowness of their strength. They weren't powerful. They were loud. They weren't dangerous. They were careless. And they had no idea what they were waking. They kept laughing, because predators don't hear the heartbeat of a dragon beneath the ground. They don't sense the heat building under the scales. They only see stillness and assume death. They step closer. They relax. They lower their guard. They laugh. And then the stillness ends. They didn't know that yet, but they would, because stillness is not surrender, it's restraint. And restraint, when released, is devastating. The war I fought where no one clapped, there was a war no one saw. No banners, no witnesses, no applause waiting at the end. Just me and my own mind. This is the part they never talk about, the part that doesn't look heroic. The part that doesn't inspire quotes or earn respect. The part where strength doesn't feel powerful, it feels heavy, because the loudest battles are easy. The silent ones ruin you. I didn't fight enemies with faces. I fought doubts that sounded like my own voice. I fought questions that never slept. I fought the quiet certainty that maybe they were right about me. Maybe I was nothing. Maybe my silence wasn't discipline, but proof I didn't belong. Those thoughts don't shout. They whisper. And whispers are harder to kill. I woke up tired before the day even began, not physically, spiritually, like something inside me had already lost a battle before I opened my eyes. I questioned everything, my restraint, my patience, my worth. Was I waiting or hiding? Was I building something or just afraid to fail out loud? No one saw those questions. No one heard them echo in my skull. To the world, I looked calm, controlled, unbothered. Inside, I was bleeding, bleeding in a soundproof room. I would have welcomed an enemy I could see, someone to fight, someone to blame, but there was no villain standing across from me. There was just silence, and silence doesn't let you distract yourself. Silence forces you to sit with every doubt you've ever swallowed. It presses your face into the questions you avoided when the world was noisy enough to drown them out. Why am I like this? Why does this hurt so much? Why do I feel so alone even when I'm surrounded? I fought those questions with no weapons. No guidance, no reassurance that I was on the right path, no voice saying, "Keep going." There was no crowd chanting my name. There was no one clapping when I got back up. Because no one knew I'd fallen. That's the cruel truth of internal war. You don't get credit for surviving it. You don't get recognition for not breaking. You don't get medals for holding yourself together when no one is watching. You just endure day after day. I learned how heavy silence could become, not the calm kind. The oppressive kind. The kind that presses down on your chest and makes every breath feel like effort. Silence stopped being neutral. It became a weight, a test. Some nights I wondered if this was what losing looked like, not a dramatic collapse, not a public failure, just a slow erosion of certainty, a quiet decay of confidence. I questioned my discipline. I questioned my patience. I questioned whether my restraint was strength or self-sabotage. No one answered. There was no rescue coming. No one was going to kick down the door and pull me out of my head. No one was going to validate the war I was fighting. No one was going to tell me I was doing the right thing. If I wanted to survive, I had to do it alone. So I did. I fought myself in the dark. I fought the urge to speak just to feel alive. I fought the temptation to explode, to lash out, to become loud just so someone would finally notice the pain. But I didn't, because I knew something then, something ugly but true. Noise wouldn't save me. Attention wouldn't heal me. Applause wouldn't fix what was breaking inside. I had to face it. I had to stand in that soundproof room and bleed without screaming. There were days when getting through felt like a victory, not success, not triumph, just survival. I learned the difference. Success is visible. Survival is silent. I survived moments that would have shattered louder people. I carried thoughts that would have crushed egos built on validation. I endured the kind of isolation that makes you question your own reality. And still I said nothing, not because I was numb, but because I was learning how to carry pain without letting it leak into weakness. That war taught me discipline no enemy ever could. It taught me how to control my reactions when every nerve wanted release. It taught me how to endure discomfort without seeking escape. It stripped me down. No excuses, no performances, no masks, just me and the truth. And the truth was brutal. I was afraid. I was uncertain. I was exhausted, but I wasn't broken. That realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly between the cracks of doubt. Every time I endured another night without collapsing, every time I chose restraint over impulse, every time I refused to let my pain turn me reckless, I was changing, not into something softer, into something colder, something more controlled. Pain does that when it has nowhere to go. When it isn't expressed, it condenses, it hardens, it becomes dense. Like pressure turning carbon into diamond, I started to notice it. My emotions didn't spike anymore. They settled. My reactions slowed. My thoughts sharpened. I stopped needing reassurance. I stopped craving approval, not because I didn't want it, because I couldn't rely on it. That war taught me self-sufficiency at a cost. It taught me how to stand without leaning on praise, how to keep going without encouragement, how to believe in something no one else could see. That kind of belief is dangerous because it doesn't disappear when challenged. It doesn't flinch when mocked. It doesn't crumble when ignored. It waits. I learned how to sit with discomfort without numbing it. I learned how to let sadness pass through without letting it define me. I learned how to exist in uncertainty without begging for answers. Those lessons didn't feel empowering at the time. They felt lonely. They felt endless. There were moments when I thought about giving up, not in dramatic ways, but quietly. The kind of giving up where you shrink, where you settle, where you stop expecting anything from yourself. That was the real enemy, not pain, apathy, and I fought it with everything I had left. I forced myself to care when caring hurt. I forced myself to believe when belief felt foolish. I forced myself to keep moving internally even when the outside world saw nothing happening. No one clapped for that. No one noticed the discipline it took not to collapse. No one praised the restraint it took not to lash out. No one celebrated the nights I survived without losing myself. That war was fought in isolation, but it made me unrecognizable. I came out of it quieter but heavier, calmer but more dangerous, less expressive but infinitely more controlled. Silence stopped being a burden. It became a crucible, a place where weakness burned away because there was nowhere to hide it. I didn't win that war with confidence. I won it with endurance, with repetition, with stubborn refusal to disappear. And when it was over, when the noise inside finally settled, I realized something terrifying. I no longer needed anyone to believe in me. I had already proven it to myself. That changes you. Because once you survive yourself, the world feels smaller. Once you outlast your own doubt, external opposition loses its power. I walked out of that soundproof room alone. No applause. No witnesses, no recognition, just scars no one could see, and strength no one could take. That war didn't make me loud, it made me unshakable, and the ones who never clapped never even knew what I survived. Every unspoken word turned into a blade. Something changed when I stopped letting words escape me. They didn't disappear, they didn't dissolve, they didn't weaken, they condensed. Every sentence I swallowed didn't die, it sharpened. Every thought I held back didn't fade, it hardened. Silence stopped being empty space and became a forge. I didn't speak, I sharpened. At first, the pressure hurt. Thoughts pressed against the inside of my skull, demanding release. Anger begged to be shouted. Pain wanted an audience. I felt it all tight, restless, volatile, but I refused to let it spill, because spilled emotion is wasted energy. And wasted energy never wins wars, so I learned to hold it. I let my thoughts grind against each other instead of escaping my mouth. I let questions collide, arguments form, conclusions sharpen. What would have been noise became structure. What would have been reaction became calculation. I didn't speak, I sharpened. Silence became resistance training for the mind. Every moment I didn't react, my restraint grew stronger. Every insult I didn't answer, my focus tightened. Every injustice I didn't scream about became fuel instead of flame. Anger is easy when it's loud. Control is harder. Anyone can explode. Anyone can rant. Anyone can throw words like weapons and feel powerful for a moment. But power that leaks out through the mouth doesn't last. I learned that the hard way, so I stopped wasting my anger. I refined it. I stripped it of impulse. I burned away the theatrics. I removed the need to be understood. What remained was clean, dense, focused, cold anger, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that waits, the kind that chooses its moment. I didn't speak, I sharpened. Pain stopped being something I wanted to explain. It became something I stored, every disappointment stacked on the last, every betrayal layered itself deeper, every dismissal added weight, not chaos, ammunition. Pain stored long enough becomes dangerous, not because it explodes, but because it can be aimed. They thought my silence meant I had moved on. I hadn't. I had archived everything. I remembered the tone they used. I remembered the timing. I remembered the exact moment respect disappeared from their eyes. And I didn't forget. Forgetting is mercy. I wasn't merciful. I didn't speak. I sharpened. Pressure does strange things when it has nowhere to escape. It doesn't dissipate, it transforms. Like steel forged under relentless force, the weak parts burn away. Only structure survives. That's what silence did to me. It burned away the need to vent. It burned away the craving for validation. It burned away the illusion that being heard was the same as being powerful. What remained was precision. I stopped thinking in outbursts. I started thinking in outcomes. I stopped reacting to moments. I started planning beyond them. My thoughts grew slower but heavier, more deliberate, more final. I learned how to let people speak until they revealed too much. I learned how to let silence stretch until discomfort made others careless. I learned how to use restraint as pressure. Because silence doesn't just sharpen the mind, it sharpens everyone around you. They fill it with mistakes. I didn't speak, I sharpened. There were nights when my jaw ached from clenching it shut, nights when words lined up behind my teeth begging to be released. I felt the temptation to unload everything, to let them know how much they had hurt me, to make them feel it. But that would have been relief, not power. Relief fades, power stays. So I endured the pressure, and pressure taught me patience. Patience taught me timing. Timing taught me dominance. I began to notice how fragile loud people are, how desperate they are to be heard, how quickly they unravel when silence doesn't answer them. They talk to provoke, they insult to control. They shout because they need confirmation that they still exist. Silence denies them that. Silence makes them reckless. I watched it happen. They'd speak louder, then sharper, then crueler. And every escalation told me exactly where they were weakest. People reveal themselves when they aren't answered. I didn't speak. I sharpened. Every unspoken word became an edge. Every swallowed response became a blade, not wild, not erratic, balanced, weighted, ready. I stopped needing to win arguments. I started wanting to end them before they began. That's when I understood something important. Noise fights for moments. Silence prepares for outcomes. They thought my quiet was passivity. They didn't realize it was accumulation. They didn't feel the weight building behind my eyes, behind my stillness, behind my restraint. They couldn't. Pressure is invisible until it breaks something. I let them underestimate the pressure. I let them assume my calm was emptiness. I let them believe I had nothing stored, nothing prepared, nothing waiting. They were wrong. I was becoming efficient. Every thought had a purpose. Every emotion had a place. Nothing leaked. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was impulsive. I didn't speak. I sharpened. Steel doesn't complain while it's forged. It doesn't scream under the hammer. It endures heat and force until it becomes something else entirely. Stronger, cleaner, deadlier, silence was my forge, and I stayed in it longer than most people could tolerate. I learned how to sit with anger without letting it consume me. I learned how to feel pain without needing to announce it. I learned how to think clearly while carrying weight most people drop at the first chance. That discipline changed my posture. My presence, my energy. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need to perform strength. I was storing it, and stored strength radiates differently. People started noticing not because I spoke more, but because I didn't. They felt it in the pauses, in the way I listened, in the way my silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt loaded. They sensed something behind it, something unfinished, something waiting. They couldn't name it. That unsettled them, because a sharpened blade doesn't need to swing wildly. It just needs one clean moment. I didn't speak. I sharpened. Every day I held back made my reactions rarer but more decisive. When I did speak, it wasn't to express, it was to end discussion, to cut through noise, to finalize, no emotion, no explanation, just impact. That's when I realized how dangerous restraint can be. People fear explosions. They should fear compression. Explosion is loss of control. Compression is mastery. I mastered my silence, and in doing so, I mastered myself. Pain stopped being something that happened to me. It became something I owned, something I shaped, something I could deploy when necessary. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was prepared. Every unspoken word was still there, lined up, sharpened, waiting, not screaming for release, not begging for acknowledgement, just ready. Ready for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. Because when a blade finally moves after years of sharpening, it doesn't hesitate. It doesn't miss. It doesn't need a second strike. I didn't speak. I sharpened. And what I became in that silence was not something meant to stay hidden forever. I almost became the person they wanted me to be. There was a moment, a dangerous one, when I almost disappeared. Not physically, internally. A moment when the weight of silence shifted. When it stopped feeling like control and started feeling like erasure. When holding everything in no longer felt strategic, it felt corrosive. I almost surrendered who I was, not in a dramatic way, not with a declaration, but quietly, subtly. The way people lose themselves every day without anyone noticing. I almost became smaller. I almost became easier to digest, easier to ignore, easier to tolerate. I almost became what they wanted. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started with doubt disguised as humility, with questions that sounded reasonable. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I should tone it down. Maybe my silence isn't strength. Maybe it's just proof I don't belong here. Those thoughts are venomous because they feel logical. They don't attack you. They persuade you. I almost apologized for existing, not out loud, but in posture, in the way I took up less space, in the way I softened my presence so others wouldn't feel threatened, in the way I second-guessed every instinct that made me different. I almost learned to smile when I was dismissed, to nod when I was undermined, to accept disrespect as the cost of peace. That's how it happens. You don't kneel in front of them. You kneel inside yourself. I almost did. I started asking for permission I didn't need. I started censoring thoughts before they fully formed. I started editing myself, not to be better, but to be acceptable. That's when silence turned dangerous. Because silence can protect you or it can poison you. And I felt it turning inward. The pressure I had controlled so carefully started to rot instead of refine. Anger didn't sharpen, it curdled. Pain didn't store, it spread. I stopped directing it outward. I aimed it at myself. I questioned my worth, my purpose, my right to exist as I was. I almost believed them. I almost believed that my restraint was a flaw, that my depth was a burden, that my intensity was something to be ashamed of. I almost convinced myself that survival required shrinking. That to live in this world, you have to sand yourself down until you're smooth enough not to offend anyone. I almost did it. I almost traded power for approval, depth for comfort, identity for safety. There were moments, real ones, where I thought about abandoning everything that made me dangerous. My discipline, my patience, my refusal to perform. I thought about becoming agreeable, predictable, harmless. I thought about becoming invisible on purpose, because invisibility hurts less when it's chosen. Silence started whispering lies. It told me to disappear quietly. It told me resistance wasn't worth the cost. It told me the fight inside me was pointless. And for a moment, I listened. That's the truth. I didn't stand strong the whole time. I bent. I wavered. I flirted with surrender. I almost became the person who apologizes before speaking, the person who doubts before deciding. The person who asks, "Is this okay?" instead of stating, "This is who I am." That version of me was safe. That version of me was digestible. That version of me would never threaten anyone. And that's exactly why it terrified me, because I could feel something vital dying, not loudly, quietly. A slow suffocation of instinct, a dulling of edge, a numbing of hunger. I felt myself shrinking to fit rooms I was never meant to fit into. I felt myself cutting off parts of my identity just to avoid friction. That's when I understood how people lose themselves without anyone forcing them. No chains, no cages, just pressure. Pressure to conform, pressure to be less, pressure to apologize for not being small enough. I almost let that pressure win. Silence, the thing that once protected me, nearly became the thing that erased me. It stopped being armor and started becoming a coffin. I could feel it. The heaviness wasn't sharpening me anymore. It was draining me. I wasn't becoming controlled. I was becoming hollow, and hollow people don't scare anyone. They don't change anything. They don't leave marks on the world. They just exist. Barely. That realization hit hard, because I didn't survive everything. I survived just to fade quietly. I didn't endure isolation, doubt, pressure, and pain just to become a shadow of myself by choice. I almost forgot that. I almost convinced myself that peace was worth the price of my identity. It's not. There was a moment, brief, dangerous, where I stood at the edge of that decision, where I could have stepped fully into that smaller version of myself and never looked back, where I could have told myself it was maturity, that it was growth, that it was wisdom. It was surrender. And something inside me refused to die quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly, a refusal without words. A resistance without noise, a presence that said, no, this is not how I end. I realized then how close I had come, how easily I could have been reshaped, how silently I could have been erased. And that realization was terrifying, because if I could almost betray myself, so could anyone listening to this. Look at yourself. Look at the moments you wanted to shrink, the times you almost apologized for being intense, the times you almost traded truth for acceptance. Do you feel that tension? That's not weakness. That's the fight for your identity. I didn't win it yet, but I woke up. And waking up is dangerous, because once you see how close you came to disappearing, you stop negotiating with anything that asks you to be less. Silence had almost killed me, but it also showed me the edge, the moment before collapse, the point where something had to change, and it did, not softly, not gently, but decisively. I didn't become who they wanted me to be, and from that moment on, I never came that close again. Then I realized, silence is not absence, it's control. Then it happened, not like an explosion, not like a scream, but like a blade finally finding balance in the hand that holds it. I realized something that changed the shape of everything. Silence is not absence. It never was. Silence is control, and once that truth settled in me, nothing sounded the same again. For so long, they mistook my quiet for emptiness. They assumed that because I didn't announce myself, there was nothing inside me worth announcing. They were wrong, painfully wrong. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not confusion. Silence is not fear. Silence is restraint. And restraint is power refined. I saw it clearly then, clearer than I'd ever seen anything in my life. The world belongs to those who rush to speak, but it is ruled by those who choose when not to. Loud people expose themselves. Every word they throw into the air reveals a need. A hunger. A crack, they speak to be seen, they shout to feel real. They make noise because they're afraid of what happens when everything goes quiet. Silence terrifies them because silence watches. I realized that while they were busy declaring, explaining, defending, I was learning. While they were performing strength, I was cultivating it. They told me silence meant I had nothing to say. No. Silence meant I was listening, and listening teaches you where power actually lives. In silence, you notice patterns. You see how people repeat themselves when they're insecure. You see how confidence leaks when words become excessive. You see who talks to dominate and who talks to hide. You see the lies beneath the noise. Silence gives you time. Time sharpens awareness. Awareness becomes leverage. That's when it clicked. I hadn't been losing ground by staying quiet. I had been gaining territory. Control doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who can end the room by speaking once. Silence doesn't beg for attention, it commands it. Because when someone who rarely speaks finally does, every word lands heavier. Silence chooses when to strike. I stopped seeing my quiet as something to explain. I stopped treating it like a flaw to correct. I stopped wishing I was more like them, more visible, more vocal, more approved. I understood that the loudest people are often the most transparent. They reveal their limits willingly. Their anger spills. Their fear leaks. Their intentions announce themselves before they ever act. But silence? Silence conceals until the moment is right. Silence lets others underestimate you. And underestimation is one of the greatest advantages in existence. They thought I was passive, I was patient. They thought I was unsure, I was measuring. They thought I lacked presence, I was building gravity. Silence isn't empty space, it's compressed force, like the pause before impact. Like the stillness before a storm decides where to land. Like the inhale before something irreversible is spoken. Silence chooses when to strike. I realized that every time I didn't react, I gained ground. Every time I didn't explain myself, I kept control. Every time I let them talk while I watched, I learned exactly who they were. People reveal themselves when you let them speak long enough. They tell you their fears without realizing it. They show you their weaknesses disguised as confidence. They expose their intentions while believing they're in charge. Silence lets them feel powerful right up until they are. That's the cruel elegance of it. Silence doesn't compete, it waits. And waiting is not doing nothing, waiting is positioning. The world teaches you to fill every gap with words, to respond immediately, to prove yourself constantly. To explain, justify, clarify, that's not power, that's panic disguised as productivity. Power moves slower. Power doesn't rush. Power doesn't need permission to exist. I realize that silence protects your center. It keeps your intentions clean. It stops you from bleeding strategy in front of people who haven't earned the right to know your direction. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts. Not everyone deserves your voice. And once I accepted that, I felt something dangerous settle into me. Calm, not peace, clarity, a terrifying kind of clarity. I understood then why silence unsettles people, why they push you to talk, why they label you distant, cold, arrogant, strange. Because silence removes their leverage. They can't manipulate what they can't read. They can't control what doesn't react. They can't predict what doesn't announce itself. Silence denies them access, and denial feels like threat. Silence chooses when to strike. I stopped rushing to defend myself. I stopped correcting every misunderstanding. I stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. I let them guess. I let them wonder. I let them doubt. Because doubt weakens those who rely on certainty, and I was done giving them certainty. Silence gave me the advantage of invisibility without erasure, presence without performance, strength without display. It taught me that you don't need to dominate every conversation to dominate the outcome. You just need to outlast the noise. While they exhausted themselves talking, I conserved energy. While they argued, I observed. While they revealed, I refined. Silence sharpened my timing, and timing is everything. A blade swung too early is wasted. A word spoken too soon is ignored. A move made without patience is exposed. Silence waits until the moment matters. Then it ends the discussion. I realized something else too, something even darker. Silence doesn't just protect you from others, it reveals you to yourself. In silence, there's nowhere to hide, no distractions, no applause, no validation, just you and what you actually are. And if you survive that, if you endure that, you come back different, stronger. unshakable, because you've already faced the quiet that breaks most people. They fear silence because it forces them to confront themselves. I embraced it because it forced me to sharpen myself. Silence turned my chaos into order, my rage into precision, my pain into discipline. It stripped away everything unnecessary. What remained was intention. Silence chooses when to strike, and when it does, it doesn't miss. I looked back then, at all the times I thought I was losing by not speaking. All the moments I felt overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. They weren't losses. They were camouflage. They let me move unnoticed. They let me grow without interference. They let me build without interruption. They let me become dangerous quietly. By the time they realized I wasn't empty, it was already too late. That's the irony. The world rewards noise early, but it kneels to results eventually. Silence delays recognition, but multiplies impact. When silence finally speaks, it doesn't argue. It concludes. I understood then that my quiet had never been a lack of voice. It was mastery of it. I could speak whenever I wanted. That was the difference. I chose not to because choice is control. And control is dominance without effort. Silence doesn't beg to be heard. It decides when it will be felt. From that moment on, I stopped envying the loud. I stopped comparing myself to performers, talkers, explainers. I knew something they didn't. Noise fades, precision lasts. Silence chooses when to strike, and when it does, it changes everything. While they spoke, I studied their weaknesses. While they spoke, I watched, not casually, not impatiently, precisely. They thought the noise gave them power. They believed volume meant dominance. They assumed that whoever filled the air owned the room, so they talked and talked and talked. They revealed everything. People never understand this. Noise is a confession. Every unnecessary word is a crack. Every boast is a leak. Every insult is a mirror turned outward, exposing what they fear most inside themselves. While they spoke, I listened. Not to the story they wanted me to hear, but to the truth hiding beneath it. Fear always finds a way out, if not through the eyes, then through the mouth. Some people talk to impress. That tells you they're afraid of being ordinary. Some talk to dominate. That tells you they're afraid of losing control. Some talk to belittle. That tells you they're terrified of being small. Ego is loud because ego is fragile, and fragile things make noise when touched. They didn't realize they were teaching me. They didn't know they were drawing maps of their own weaknesses with every sentence. While they spoke, I studied. Who interrupted others, who repeated themselves, who needed the last word, who couldn't stand silence without filling it. Every habit was a signal. Every pattern was a trail. They were hunters announcing their footsteps while believing they were predators. I stayed still. Silence is camouflage. Silence removes you from their calculations. It makes you unpredictable. It forces them to project, to assume, to guess. And assumptions are where people make fatal mistakes. When someone talks too much, they tell you what they want. When someone talks too fast, they tell you what they fear. When someone talks too loud, they tell you where they're insecure. They think they're hiding behind words. They're stripping themselves bare. While they spoke, I learned their rhythms. I learned what provoked them. I learned what made them reckless. I learned which buttons triggered rage and which ones triggered panic disguised as confidence. I learned who needed approval, who needed control, who needed to be feared. Needs are weaknesses wearing costumes. Silence sees through costumes. They thought I was passive because I didn't react. They thought my calm meant ignorance. They thought my restraint meant I didn't understand the game. They were wrong. I understood it so well that I refused to play it loudly. I let them overextend. I let them reveal their hand. I let them believe they were ahead, because people become careless when they think they're winning. Silence creates uncertainty. Uncertainty breeds anxiety. Anxiety makes people sloppy. They started talking more, explaining more, justifying more, overreaching more. They tried to provoke me into responding, into defending myself, into stepping into the noise where they felt comfortable. I didn't. I stayed quiet. And that silence made them uneasy. Because silence doesn't confirm their assumptions. It doesn't reward their ego. It doesn't give feedback. Silence is a blank screen, and insecure minds project their worst fears onto it. They began to wonder what I knew. They questioned what I was thinking. They imagined plans that didn't exist until their imagination created real fear. Silence lets others defeat themselves. They tried to bait me. I watched. They tried to intimidate me. I observed. They tried to dominate the space. I memorized the cracks in their armor. Predators who roar too much forget to hide their tracks. While they spoke, I noticed how often they contradicted themselves, how their stories shifted when pressure appeared, how their confidence faltered when questioned, not because they were challenged, but because they weren't listened to. People who crave attention hate being ignored more than being opposed. Silence starves their ego, and starving egos get desperate. Desperation makes people reveal strategies they should have kept hidden. Makes them rush. It makes them expose intentions before they're ready. I learned who bluffed, who postured, who depended on intimidation rather than substance. Noise is a tool for those who lack depth. Depth doesn't need to announce itself. Silence let me see who they really were when the performance slipped, when the joke stopped landing, when the room didn't respond the way they expected. That's when the truth surfaced. Arrogance covering fear, aggression covering doubt, cruelty covering insecurity. They spoke. I studied. They bragged about victories that required validation. I cataloged the desperation behind them. They mocked what they didn't understand. I noted the boundaries of their awareness. They insulted what threatened them. I identified exactly where to apply pressure. Silence is not passive observation. It is active analysis. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to prove anything. I already had what mattered: information. And information is power when combined with patience. They mistook my quiet for ignorance. They thought I wasn't sharp because I wasn't loud, but blades don't make noise until they cut. While they spoke, I learned how they reacted under stress, who lashed out, who folded, who deflected, who blamed others when things went wrong. Those reactions tell you everything about how someone will break. I watched their faces when they weren't the center of attention. I listened to what they said when they thought no one important was listening. People tell the truth when they think it doesn't matter. Silence makes you invisible enough to hear it. They walked freely. I followed their tracks. They assumed I was behind. I was above. They exposed themselves because they believed silence meant blindness. They never considered that silence sees more than noise ever could. I didn't rush to act. Acting too soon would have wasted what I learned. I waited. I refined. I let patterns repeat until they became predictable. Predictability is death, and they were predictable. Every loud declaration boxed them in. Every boast narrowed their options. Every insult revealed where they felt threatened. They didn't realize they were building the blueprint of their own downfall out loud. While they spoke, I sharpened my understanding, not emotionally, strategically. Emotion clouds judgment. Silence clears it. I detached. I observed. I calculated. The more they talked, the more certain I became. They weren't as powerful as they pretended. They were just noisy. Silence made that obvious. When you remove the performance, what remains is capability, and capability doesn't need an audience. I realized something dangerous then. They needed me to respond. I didn't need them at all. That imbalance terrified them because power flows toward whoever needs less. They filled the air trying to control the narrative, trying to frame the situation, trying to define who was strong and who was weak. Silence refused their frame. And when you can't control the frame, you start losing control of the game. They spoke to assert dominance. I stayed silent to let dominance reveal itself. Silence doesn't challenge ego directly. It lets ego self-destruct. They became reckless, louder, meaner, more exposed. They thought escalation would force me to react. It only gave me more data. While they spoke, I studied how far they'd go, what lines they'd cross, what values they'd abandon under pressure. I learned their limits. Limits are leverage. They never saw it coming because they were too busy hearing themselves talk. Silence doesn't interrupt. Silence collects. And when silence finally moves, it moves with certainty. I didn't need to threaten. I didn't need to warn. I didn't need to announce intentions. They had already told me everything I needed to know. They spoke. I studied. And by the time they realized the prey was never visible because it was never prey at all, the hunter had already learned how to end the hunt. My silence became a mirror they couldn't escape. I said nothing. And that was when it began, not the shouting, not the accusations, the unraveling. Silence doesn't attack, it reflects. When I stopped responding, they didn't find peace. They found themselves, and what they saw staring back at them was not flattering. I said nothing. They unraveled. At first, they laughed it off, jokes, smirks, casual cruelty dressed as confidence. They told themselves my quiet didn't matter, that it meant nothing, that I had nothing, but silence doesn't disappear, it waits. And when people are left alone with it, their minds start filling the gaps. They began talking to themselves, explaining things no one asked about, defending choices no one challenged, justifying behavior no one questioned. Because silence doesn't argue, it invites confession. I said nothing. They unraveled. They projected their doubts onto me, accused me of intentions I never revealed, assigned motives I never claimed, built entire stories in their heads and then reacted to those stories as if they were real. That's what silence does. It turns imagination into an enemy. They couldn't read me, so they tried to define me. They couldn't control my reaction, so they tried to control the narrative. They couldn't provoke me into revealing myself, so they revealed themselves instead. Fear always leaks under pressure. Silence applies pressure without lifting a finger. I watched their paranoia bloom, how every pause unsettled them, how every unanswered word made them question what I knew, what I planned, what I was waiting for. They started seeing threats where there were none, started hearing judgment in stillness, started interpreting calm as calculation. They weren't wrong. Silence is calculation. I said nothing. They unraveled. Their voices grew sharper, their words more erratic. They tried to force reactions, any reaction, because certainty, even negative certainty, feels safer than uncertainty. Silence gives them none. It doesn't confirm, it doesn't deny, it just watches. And people hate being watched by something they can't read. My quiet became a mirror, and they couldn't escape what they saw in it. They saw their insecurities magnified, their guilt echoing back at them, their unresolved fears standing naked in the stillness. Still water doesn't distort reflections. It reveals monsters exactly as they are. They stared too long, and they didn't like what stared back. I said nothing. They unraveled. They began accusing me of arrogance for my restraint, of manipulation for my calm, of hostility for my neutrality. Funny how silence offends those who are already guilty. They needed me to react so they could feel justified, needed me to lash out so they could feel righteous, needed me to play the villain in their story so they could remain the hero. I refused. Silence denied them absolution, so they fought the mirror instead. They lashed out at the quiet, tried to shatter it with noise, tried to drown it in words, tried to overpower it with aggression. But silence doesn't flinch, it absorbs. Every insult they hurled bounced back with interest. Every accusation revealed what they feared being accused of. Every threat exposed how fragile their control really was. People project their shadows when the light doesn't move. I said nothing. They unraveled. Their sleep suffered. Their focus cracked. Their confidence slipped. They started replaying conversations that never happened, anticipating responses that never came. They were arguing with a ghost and losing. Silence forces confrontation not with others but with the self. They were left alone with their conscience, with their unresolved anger, with their buried guilt, with the lies they told themselves to survive, and the mirror showed everything. They saw how desperate they were for validation, how much they needed approval, how empty the noise felt when it echoed back unanswered. Noise without response is humiliation. Silence humbles without touching. I didn't need to expose them. Silence let them expose themselves. They grew defensive, suspicious, reactive. They started reading between lines that didn't exist, interpreting absence as judgment. That's the thing about still water. If you stare long enough, you start seeing what you're afraid is there. I said nothing. They unraveled. They accused me of plotting because they were always plotting. They accused me of deception because deception was their native language. They accused me of cruelty because cruelty lived comfortably inside them. Silence doesn't invent monsters, it reveals them. And once revealed, they couldn't look away. They tried to force clarity, demanded explanations, provoked confrontations, anything to break the stillness. Because silence doesn't negotiate, it waits. They didn't realize how loud their fear had become, how transparent their desperation sounded, how obvious their cracks were. They thought they were interrogating me. I was observing them bleed psychologically. I said nothing. They unraveled. They started doubting their own memories, second-guessing their words, revising their confidence. Silence corrodes certainty. It makes liars unsure of their lies, makes bullies unsure of their power, makes manipulators unsure of their grip. Because manipulation requires feedback, silence gives none. They couldn't tell if I was hurt, amused, angry, or indifferent, and not knowing is unbearable for those who crave control. Control hates ambiguity. Silence is pure ambiguity. They spiraled, overthought, overreached, overreacted. Every move they made revealed something new. Every attempt to regain control exposed how much they'd lost. They became their own enemy. I didn't push them there. The mirror did. I said nothing. They unraveled. They saw themselves as they truly were, without applause, without affirmation, without distraction, and they hated it. So they blamed the mirror. They called my silence arrogance, called it manipulation, called it cruelty. But silence isn't cruel, it's honest. It doesn't flatter, it doesn't soften, it doesn't lie. It shows people exactly who they are when no one is responding. And most people can't stand that. I felt it then. The shift. The moment silence stopped being defense and became dominance. Because they were reacting, and I was not. Reaction is weakness, stillness is control. I said nothing. They unraveled. They began fighting each other, distrusting allies, questioning loyalties, turning inward. Silence doesn't divide directly. It lets paranoia do the work. They filled the void with suspicion, with fear, with imagined threats. And those imagined threats felt real enough to destroy them. All while I remained unmoved, silent, watching. They tried one last time to provoke me, to drag me into the noise, to to force the mirror to crack. I didn't blink. Silence doesn't crack, it deepens, and in that depth they saw it. The truth they had been running from, that their power was borrowed, their confidence performative, their dominance dependent on reaction, and without it they were nothing but noise echoing into emptiness. I said nothing. They unraveled, and in their unraveling I understood something final. Silence doesn't need to strike. It lets others destroy themselves while staring at their own reflection. Still water doesn't chase monsters. It waits for them to lean close enough to fall in. Now they're watching me instead of laughing. Something changed. It didn't happen loudly. No announcement, no dramatic moment, just a shift in the air. The laughter stopped, not all at once, not cleanly. It faded in fragments, half smiles that didn't finish, jokes that landed flat, voices that hesitated before rising. They didn't notice it at first. But I did. Mockery has a rhythm, confidence has a sound, and when those disappear, what's left is attention. Cold, focused, uncomfortable attention. Now they're watching me. Before they laughed because laughter is cheap. It costs nothing to dismiss someone you think is beneath you. It's easy to mock what you don't believe will ever stand up. They thought my silence was permission. It was patience. The laughter stopped because something in them realized the game had changed, even if they didn't yet understand how. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations paused when I entered. Words were chosen more carefully. The room didn't feel lighter anymore. It felt tense. Silence does that. When a predator stops running, the forest listens. I didn't announce my growth. I didn't explain myself. I didn't demand respect. I simply stayed exactly as I was, calm, unmoved, unreadable. And that terrified them more than rage ever could, because rage is predictable, silence is not. They used to laugh because they thought I didn't notice. Now they watched because they weren't sure what I noticed. That difference is power. They started measuring their words around me, testing reactions, searching my face for signs of approval or disapproval. They didn't find any. Silence doesn't reward, it judges quietly. I could feel it, the way attention shifted, the way mockery turned into observation, the way disrespect turned into calculation. They weren't laughing anymore, they were assessing. People only assess threats. Laughter is dismissal. Attention is survival instinct. Now they're watching me. They used to speak freely around me, loose tongues, careless opinions, cruel jokes said without fear of consequence. Now conversations stalled, jokes softened, insults became indirect. They felt something watching back, not hostility, awareness. Awareness makes people nervous, because awareness means memory, it means patterns, it means accountability waiting patiently in the dark. They didn't know what I would do, and not knowing is unbearable to those who rely on control. Rooms felt different when I was present, not louder, not quieter, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. Silence carries weight once it's recognized. Before, they ignored it. Now they felt it pressing against their chest. I didn't posture. I didn't dominate physically. I didn't change my tone. Power doesn't need to change behavior. It changes perception, and perception is everything. Now they're watching me. I saw it in the way eyes followed movement, in the way names were spoken more carefully, in the way laughter died mid-breath when they realized I was listening. They weren't afraid of me, not yet. They were afraid of what I might be. Uncertainty is the seed of fear. Silence plants it deeply. They began whispering instead of laughing, speculating instead of mocking, asking questions they never asked before. Who is he really? What does he know? What is he planning? I plan nothing. That was the most terrifying part. Silence doesn't need plans, it needs presence. They tried to regain control by asserting dominance elsewhere, louder jokes, bigger performances, exaggerated confidence. It didn't work. Because once attention shifts, it never fully goes back. They could feel it. The way the room subtly aligned. The way conversations adjusted around me. The way tension spiked when I remained neutral. Neutrality is threatening to those who need reactions to survive. They didn't know if I was judging them, but they judged themselves. Now they're watching me. Mockery once gave them relief. Laughter reassured them that the hierarchy was intact, but laughter dies when hierarchy feels unstable, and it felt unstable now. They sensed something they couldn't articulate, that the quiet one was no longer below them, that the stillness they ignored had grown teeth. I didn't chase validation. I didn't seek approval. I didn't perform. I stayed exactly where I was. And the ground shifted under their feet. Predators don't need to roar. The moment prey realizes it's being watched, the hunt has already begun. I saw their posture change, shoulders stiffen, smiles tighten. Confidence turned brittle. They were aware of themselves now. Awareness ruins arrogance. They laughed before because laughter kept them from thinking. Now they thought too much. Every word was weighed, every glance questioned, every silence filled with imagined meaning. They weren't laughing anymore. They were calculating. Now they're watching me. Some tried friendliness, forced warmth, sudden respect, as if politeness could erase the past. It couldn't. Others tried indifference, pretended nothing had changed, acted casual, but indifference doesn't watch, and they were watching. They tried to reclaim the old dynamic, old jokes, old tones, old dismissals. It fell flat. Because once silence gains weight, mockery feels childish. They felt exposed. They knew I remembered everything they forgot they ever said. Silence remembers. That's its quiet threat. They weren't afraid of retaliation. They were afraid of relevance, afraid that they no longer mattered the way they thought they did, afraid that the person they dismissed had outgrown the need to respond. That kind of fear doesn't scream, it watches. Now they're watching me. I could feel the echo of my footsteps, not literal but psychological. Wherever I went, attention followed, not admiration, not hatred, respect's colder cousin. Caution. Caution is earned, not demanded. Silence earns it over time. They used to laugh because they thought I was harmless. Now they watched because they weren't sure. Uncertainty humbles even the loudest voices. They stopped interrupting, stopped talking over me, stopped assuming I wouldn't notice. They weren't sure anymore, and that uncertainty rewrote the balance of power. Power doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives when others lower their voices around you. Now they're watching me. I didn't threaten them. I didn't need to. Threats are for those who lack presence. Presence makes threats unnecessary. They felt it when I didn't flinch, when I didn't engage, when I didn't explain. Silence doesn't justify itself, it exists. And existence without apology unsettles those built on noise. They laughed before because they needed to feel superior. Now they watched because they feared being inferior. The hierarchy cracked, and cracks make people cautious. They noticed how little I spoke and how much weight each word carried when I did. Silence makes language sharper. Every sentence becomes a blade instead of decoration. They noticed that too. They listened now, not because I was louder, but because I was deliberate. Now they're watching me, and I understood something in that moment. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like attention. Sometimes it looks like silence spreading outward instead of inward. Sometimes it looks like people waiting to see what you'll do next. Even when you do nothing, I didn't need to rise above them. I let them look up on their own. That's the difference. Forced dominance demands acknowledgement. True power creates observation. They watched because they felt watched, because silence had turned the gaze around, and once the gaze turns, it never fully returns. They laughed at the quiet one. Now they wait on him. The forest is silent, not because nothing is there, but because something has stopped running, and everything else is listening. Silence makes weak minds invent stories they don't know. And it terrifies them. That's where it always begins, not with truth, not with evidence, but with the unbearable weight of not knowing. Silence doesn't explain itself, so weak minds do it for you. They don't know, and it terrifies them. At first, it was whispers, low voices leaning into corners, half sentences cut short when someone walked too close, questions disguised as jokes, jokes disguising fear. They tried to laugh it away. But laughter can't survive uncertainty for long. Silence leaves a vacuum. And humans hate empty spaces. They rush to fill them with stories, with theories, with myths that feel safer than the truth. Because the truth is simple. They don't know what I'm thinking, and that makes them powerless. They don't know, and it terrifies them, so they started inventing versions of me. One version was a mastermind, always planning, always watching, always 10 steps ahead. Another version was unstable, dangerous, unpredictable. Another was arrogant, cold, inhuman. None of them were real. But fear doesn't need reality. It needs imagination. Silence feeds imagination like fire feeds oxygen. They asked each other questions I never answered. They connected dots that didn't exist. They read meaning into pauses, into glances, into nothing at all. Nothing is terrifying when you're used to noise. They don't know, and it terrifies them. Rumors grew legs, stories grew teeth. Every retelling sharpened the blade. He knows something. He's waiting for the right moment. You can't tell what he's thinking. They said my silence was calculated. They were right, but not in the way they thought. I wasn't calculating revenge. I wasn't plotting destruction. I wasn't obsessing over them at all. I was letting their minds do the work for me. Silence doesn't spread rumors. People do. Because people fear what they can't read. They fear what doesn't react. They fear what doesn't explain itself. Silence refuses to be decoded, so they panic. They don't know, and it terrifies them. Every quiet moment became suspicious. Every delay felt intentional. Every neutral expression became a threat. They started projecting motives onto me that reflected their own. That's how you know who someone really is. They accused me of manipulation because manipulation is how they operate. They accused me of cruelty because cruelty lives comfortably inside them. They accused me of ambition because ambition scares those who never cultivated it. Silence doesn't accuse, it reveals. They watched me from a distance, afraid to get close, afraid to ask directly, afraid of hearing nothing in response, because nothing would confirm their fear. Silence doesn't deny stories, it lets them spiral. They don't know, and it terrifies them. Some tried to control the narrative, to define me before I could define myself. They spoke with authority, confidence, certainty. It didn't matter. The more they spoke, the more desperate they sounded. Because certainty without proof is just noise wearing a crown. Silence took that crown away. They noticed how calm I remained while stories swirled around me. How untouched I seemed by the chaos they created. That made it worse. If I had reacted, they could have anchored their theories. If I had denied, they could have dismissed them. If I had explained, they could have minimized them. I did none of it. Silence starves closure, and without closure, the mind eats itself. They don't know, and it terrifies them. They began contradicting each other. One rumor clashed with the next. One theory canceled out another. Was I brilliant or broken, calculated or reckless, patient or passive-aggressive? They couldn't agree, and that confusion turned inward. Confusion breeds paranoia. Paranoia breeds fear. Fear breeds obedience. Silence doesn't need to command. It lets fear organize itself. They started self-censoring, watching what they said, watching what they did, watching each other. because if I wasn't reacting, maybe I was remembering. And memory is dangerous to people with a past they regret. They don't know, and it terrifies them. Some tried to confront me indirectly, fishing for reactions, dropping hints, making comments meant to provoke. I stayed quiet. Silence doesn't bite the bait. And when bait goes untouched, the fisherman starts questioning the water. They wondered if I was offended, if I was amused, if I was waiting. They wondered if today was the day. The not knowing gnawed at them. Weak minds can't coexist with ambiguity. They need certainty even if it's false. So they invented certainty. They told themselves stories where they were still in control, stories where my silence was weakness, stories where I was irrelevant, but their behavior betrayed them. People don't monitor what they believe is harmless. They don't know, and it terrifies them. Silence became a myth-making machine. Every absence of response was interpreted as strategy. Every still moment was treated like a warning sign. They started attributing power to me simply because I refused to give them access. Access is currency. Silence keeps it locked away. They mythologized me because myths are easier than facing reality. The reality that someone doesn't need to explain themselves to matter. That someone doesn't need permission to exist with weight. That someone doesn't need to speak to be powerful. They don't know, and it terrifies them. The stories grew darker, more exaggerated, more dramatic, because fear escalates when left alone. Silence isolates fear inside the mind, and inside the mind, fear mutates. They imagined consequences that never came, retribution that never arrived, judgment that never manifested. And yet they reacted as if it already had. That's the beauty of silence. It lets others punish themselves. They began walking carefully, choosing words, avoiding topics, avoiding me, not because I demanded it, but because their imagination did. They don't know, and it terrifies them. They tried to label me to make me manageable. Villain, manipulator, threat. Labels are cages. Silence slips through bars. No labels stuck because I never confirmed any of them. I existed outside their definitions, and that made them feel small, because power isn't being loud enough to be heard, it's being quiet enough to be feared. They don't know, and it terrifies them. I heard the stories. Of course I did. Silence doesn't mean deaf. I heard every rumor wrapped in laughter, every theory whispered with fake confidence. Every myth told to reassure themselves that they still understood the world. They didn't. And that loss of understanding shook them. People fear the unknown because the unknown doesn't care about their rules. Silence breaks rules by refusing to acknowledge them. They wanted me predictable, readable, contained. Silence denied all three. They don't know, and it terrifies them. And in that terror, I saw the final shift. They stopped asking who I was. They started asking what I could do. That's when you know fear has matured, because fear no longer seeks explanation, it seeks safety, and safety doesn't come from noise, it comes from staying out of the way. Silence made weak minds invent stories, and those stories made them smaller, quieter, more careful. I didn't spread fear, I let it spread itself. They don't know, and it terrifies them. And that terror, that's not my weapon, that's theirs. I just gave it space to breathe. I no longer need to explain myself, I no longer need to explain myself. Hear that. Say it aloud if you must. I no longer need to explain myself, because explanations are chains. Explanations are invitations for judgment. Explanations are cracks in armor. I've offered words before. I've justified choices. I've begged for understanding. And what did it get me? Nothing. Nothing but louder voices. Nothing but doubt. Nothing but chains forged from the very air I breathed. No more. Silence is stronger than any argument. Silence is sharper than any sword. Silence doesn't ask. Silence doesn't plead. Silence simply exists, and in that existence it commands. I no longer need to justify. I no longer need to rationalize. I no longer need to negotiate my presence, because presence itself is power, and power needs no permission. Power needs no validation. Power only needs acknowledgement. I watch the room. I see the questions forming on faces. I see the impatience in gestures. I see the fear behind their eagerness to define me. Let them watch, let them wonder, let them guess. Because the moment I speak to justify myself, I weaken, and I have refused weakness for too long to return to it now. I am like a king who does not announce his crown. The crown rests heavy on his head. It gleams in silence. It commands without a word. It does not ask to be noticed. It does not seek permission to exist. I wear my authority like armor. I carry my strength like a weapon. I do not explain. I do not apologize. I do not wait for approval. I no longer need to defend who I am. I no longer need to negotiate my choices. I no longer need to justify my ambition, my rage, my vision. Because those who matter, those who understand, they already see. And those who do not, let them stew in the chaos of their ignorance. Let them stumble in the dark of their assumptions. Let them quake at the reality that I exist, unbowed, unshaken, unexplainable. I speak only when it serves me. I act only when it strengthens me. I move only when it shifts the balance in my favor. The rest, all the rest is silence. All the rest is power. All the rest is mine. I have learned that words are weapons, but silence is a fortress. I have learned that explanations are gifts, but authority is claimed, not begged for. I have learned that you cannot make others see your truth. You can only make them live in its shadow. And in that shadow I thrive. I no longer justify my decisions. I no longer apologize for my existence. I no longer whisper when I could roar, because power does not whisper. Power does not justify. Power does not ask. Power simply is. I am that power. I have claimed it. I have sharpened it. I have perfected it. I no longer need to explain myself. I no longer need to validate my choices. I no longer bow to the demands of those who cannot comprehend. Silence asserts authority. Silence protects. Silence dominates. And I am silent. And I am whole. And I am feared. I no longer need to explain myself. I no longer need to ask for permission. I no longer need the approval of anyone. I am the ruler of my own world. I am the master of my own fate. I am the king who does not announce his crown because it is already known. It is already felt. It is already obeyed. Let them talk. Let them judge. Let them invent their stories. I don't need their narrative. I don't need their validation. I don't need their understanding. I only need myself. And that is more than enough. I am complete. I am unstoppable. I am the silence that commands. I no longer need to explain myself. I never will again. My quiet presence is louder than their screams. I don't speak. I arrive. Listen. Hear that emptiness, that pause, that hesitation. That is my voice. I don't need to shout. I don't need to demand. I don't need to prove, because silence has weight. Silence carries authority. Silence bends the room to my will. They chatter, they gossip, they yell. Their voices bounce off walls. Their fear leaks through every word. And I don't speak. I arrive. And suddenly the air changes. The walls tight. The laughter dies mid-breath. I move and eyes follow. I sit and tension rises. I exist and chaos hums beneath the surface. They think noise is power. They think fury is strength. They believe that screams define dominance. They are wrong. Dominance is quiet. Dominance is patience. Dominance is watching, waiting, becoming the eye of a storm no one sees coming. I don't speak. I arrive. Every gesture, every glance, every measured step, they read it. And in their reading, they falter, they stumble. They reveal more than they intend. I am still. I am unshaken. I am the calm that devours. Their nerves become tangible. Their mouths open, then close. Their sentences die before they finish, because my quiet presence is louder than their screams. I arrive and the air bends to me. I arrive and shadows retreat. I arrive and they are reminded that power does not scream, that authority does not beg, that fear obeys the one who does not need to announce their arrival. I don't speak. I arrive. I watch them twist themselves into knots. I watch them invent explanations. I watch them project weakness where there is none. And I am untouched, and I am unconquered, and I am more than they can bear. I don't shout my victories. I don't brag about my strength. I don't announce my intentions. I move silently, but my presence is a warning. I exist quietly, but my existence terrifies. I do nothing, yet everything shifts around me. They run on nerves and noise. I thrive in stillness. They bleed chaos. I harvest control. I don't speak. I arrive. Because the room obeys what it cannot challenge. Because silence commands what fury cannot. Because presence refined, sharpened, perfected is the weapon that leaves scars deeper than any scream. I arrive and their hands shake. I arrive and their minds race. I arrive and their souls recognize something they cannot name. Power, real power, I don't speak. I arrive. And when I leave, the echo remains, a reminder, a warning, a proof that dominance is not in noise, but in quiet control. I don't speak. I arrive. And in that arrival, I am unstoppable. I am feared, I am inevitable. I am the calm they cannot survive. I don't speak, I arrive. And in every room I enter, every mind I touch, every fear I ignite, I have already won. Because silence is louder than screams, because stillness is heavier than rage, because presence is a crown that cannot be taken, I don't speak, I arrive. And that is dominance. Your silence is making them question everything. The era of UNDRSTIMATI. Foundation of pain. I was a shadow in a room full of mirrors. They spoke. I listened. I remembered. They laughed. I disappeared. They mocked. I endured. I existed where no one noticed. A world obsessed with noise, with flash, with shallow proof of power. I was capable. I was present. I was alive. And they didn't see me. Silence, they said, was weakness. Invisibility, they said, was defeat. I learned the first truth. The world cannot measure depth with shallow eyes. I learned early that silence scares no one at first. I spoke and punishment followed. I stayed quiet and survival remained. The lessons were cold, etched into my bones. Every unspoken word became armor. Every denied scream a shield. Silence is not surrender. Silence is preparation. Silence is a weapon that waits for its moment. They confused my stillness for surrender. They laughed. I watched. They grew reckless, arrogant, loud in their assumptions, like predators mistaking a sleeping dragon for a corpse, and I did not move. I only watched. Internal war, the silent battle, the war I fought was invisible. No one clapped, no one cheered, no one noticed the battles waged in the hollows of my mind. Doubt clawed at me. Despair whispered in shadows. I bled in a soundproof room. Every strike I endured alone, every scar unseen, but I survived. Every unspoken word sharpened into a blade. Anger refined, pain stored like ammunition. I didn't speak, I sharpened. Pressure forged steel in me. Every insult, every mockery, every dismissal became fuel. I transformed silence into strength. I almost became the person they wanted me to be. I almost shrank. I almost apologized for existing. I almost let their vision of me consume mine, but I did not. I realized that the poison of their expectations would kill my fire, and I refused to die. The realization, the turning point, then I realized silence is not absence, it is control. Loud voices reveal themselves. Fools stumble over their own egos. The silent observe. The silent wait. The silent strike when the moment is theirs. Silence chooses when to strike. And I am that silence. While they spoke, I studied their weaknesses, every twitch, every hesitation, every brag and bluster. They left trails like prey in the snow. I followed them in shadow. I learned. I prepared. My silence became a mirror they could not escape. I said nothing. They unraveled. Their doubts, their fears, their paranoia, they consumed themselves while I remained untouched. I was still water, and they saw monsters of their own making. Now they were watching me instead of laughing. The laughter died. The attention sharpened. My presence was a threat they could not ignore. Silence makes weak minds invent stories, rumors, theories, fear they don't know, and it terrifies them. Every lie they tell themselves is another chain they bind around their own minds. And I am free. I no longer need to explain myself. Explanations are weakness. Silence asserts authority. Power no longer asks permission. I am the king who does not announce his crown. It gleams in quiet. It commands without word. It is obeyed without plea. I do not justify. I do not negotiate. I do not bow. I only exist. And in that existence, I am unstoppable. The power shift, fear awakens. I don't speak, I arrive. My quiet presence is louder than their screams. The room bends to me, the air tightens. They feel it though they cannot name it. They chatter, they guess, they project their fear onto the void I create. Their nerves betray them, their sentences die mid-thought. I move, I breathe, I am still. And yet everything shifts. Now they watch me instead of mocking. Attention replaces laughter. Silence becomes tension. Footsteps echo when the predator stops running. I don't speak, I arrive. Silence fuels chaos in others. It forces them to confront themselves. It reveals their monsters. I say nothing, they unravel. I am the shadow in their mind they cannot outrun. Dominance, the villain awakens. I don't speak. I arrive. Every room I enter bends to me. Every eye seeks me, even as lips tremble. Stillness controls the room. Others speak nervously around silence. They think noise is power. I am proof that it is not. I don't shout. I don't explain. I don't justify. I exist. And existence is louder than any scream. I am calm, I am measured, I am inevitable. My quiet presence eclipses their fury. Their voices, their theories, their fear, nothing withstands me. I arrive, and the room obeys. I don't speak, I arrive. Dominance is in stillness. Authority is in silence. Fear belongs to those who cannot read me. And I am unreadable. I don't speak. I arrive. My quiet is a weapon. My stillness is a crown. My presence is a throne. I do not need validation. I do not need applause. I do not need explanation. I am complete. I am untouchable. I am inevitable. I don't speak. I arrive. And every mind I touch trembles. Every fear I ignite obeys. Every room I enter bends. And I am the calm they cannot survive. I don't speak. I arrive. Because power does not shout. Authority does not beg. Dominance does not explain. Silence is louder than screams. Presence heavier than rage. And I am all of it. I don't speak, I arrive. And that is victory. Your silence is making them question everything. The era of UNDRSTIMATI. Foundation of pain. I was a shadow in a room full of mirrors. They spoke. I listened, I remembered, they laughed, I disappeared, they mocked, I endured, I existed where no one noticed. A world obsessed with noise, with flash, with shallow proof of power. I was capable, I was present, I was alive. And they didn't see me. Silence, they said, was weakness. Invisibility was defeat. I learned the first truth: the world cannot measure depth with shallow eyes. I learned early that silence scares no one at first. I spoke and punishment followed. I stayed quiet and survival remained. Every unspoken word became armor, every denied scream a shield. Silence is not surrender. Silence is preparation. Silence is a weapon that waits for its moment. They confused my stillness for surrender. They laughed. I watched. They grew reckless, arrogant, loud in their assumptions, like predators mistaking a sleeping dragon for a corpse, and I did not move. I only watched. Internal war, the silent battle, the war I fought, was invisible. No one clapped, no one cheered, no one noticed the battles waged in the hollows of my mind. Doubt clawed at me. Despair whispered in shadows. I bled in a soundproof room. Every strike I endured alone, every scar unseen, but I survived, every unspoken word. Sharpened into a blade, anger refined, pain stored like ammunition. I didn't speak, I sharpened. Pressure forged steel in me. Every insult, every mockery, every dismissal became fuel. I transformed silence into strength. I almost became the person they wanted me to be. I almost shrank. I almost apologized for existing. I almost let their vision consume mine, but I did not. I realized the poison of their expectations would kill my fire, and I refused to die. The realization, the turning point, then I realized silence is not absence, it is control. Loud voices reveal themselves, fools stumble over their own ego. The silent observe, the silent wait. The silent strike when the moment is theirs. Silence chooses when to strike, and I am that silence. While they spoke, I studied their weaknesses, every twitch, every hesitation, every brag, every bluster. They left trails like prey in the snow. I followed them in shadow. I learned. I prepared. My silence became a mirror they could not escape. I said nothing. They unraveled. Their doubts, their fears, their paranoia, they consumed themselves while I remained untouched. I was still water, and they saw monsters of their own making. Now they were watching me instead of laughing. The laughter died. Attention sharpened. My presence a threat they could not ignore. Silence makes weak minds invent stories, rumors, theories, fear they don't know, and it terrifies them. Every lie they tell themselves another chain. They bind around their own minds, and I am free. I no longer need to explain myself. Explanations are weakness. Silence asserts authority. Power no longer asks permission. I am the king who does not announce his crown. It gleams in quiet. It commands without word. It is obeyed without plea. I do not justify. I do not negotiate. I do not bow. I only exist. And in that existence, I am unstoppable. The power shift, fear awakens. I don't speak. I arrive. My quiet presence is louder than their screams. The room bends to me. The air tightens. They feel it, though they cannot name it. They chatter, they guess, they project their fear onto the void I create. Their nerves betray them. Their sentences die mid-thought. I move, I breathe, I am still. And yet everything shifts. Now they watch me instead of mocking. Attention replaces laughter. Silence becomes tension. Footsteps echo when the predator stops running. I don't speak. I arrive. Silence fuels chaos. In others, it forces them to confront themselves. It reveals their monsters. I say nothing. They unravel. I am the shadow in their mind they cannot outrun. Dominance, the villain awakens. I don't speak. I arrive. Every room I enter bends to me. Every eye seeks me, even as lips tremble. Stillness controls the room. Others speak nervously around silence. They think noise is power. I am proof it is not. I don't shout. I don't explain. I don't justify. I exist. And existence is louder than any scream. I am calm. I am measured. I am inevitable. My quiet presence eclipses their fury. Their voices, their theories, their fear, nothing withstands me. I don't speak. I arrive. Dominance is in stillness. Authority is in silence. Fear belongs to those who cannot read me. And I am unreadable. I don't speak. I arrive. My quiet is a weapon, my stillness a crown, my presence a throne. I do not need validation. I do not need applause. I do not need explanation. I am complete. I am untouchable. I am inevitable. I don't speak. I arrive. Every mind I touch trembles. Every fear I ignite obeys. Every room I enter bends. And I am the calm they cannot survive. I don't speak. I arrive. Power does not shout. Authority does not beg. Dominance does not explain. Silence is louder than screams, presence heavier than rage, and I am all of it. I don't speak, I arrive, and that is victory. I let them fill the silence with fear, not because I was merciful, not because I was unsure, but because fear works harder than any blade I could raise myself. I learned something they never did. You don't need to chase your enemies. You don't need to shout your intentions. You don't need to prove your strength. You just need to step back and let their minds do the killing for you. I stopped explaining. I stopped reacting. I stopped correcting their lies. And in that vacuum, fear moved in. They thought silence meant confusion. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought silence meant I was hesitating, so I gave them more of it. I gave them nothing to hold, nothing to read, nothing to confirm or deny, and that nothing became unbearable. Because weak minds cannot survive unanswered questions, they panic in the absence of clarity. They rot when certainty is taken away. So they started talking, not to me, about me. They whispered first, then they speculated, then they warned each other. He's planning something. He's waiting. He knows more than he says. I never confirmed a single word. I just existed, calm, still, unbothered, and fear did the rest. Fear is efficient. Fear is creative. Fear doesn't sleep. While I stayed silent, they stayed awake. They replayed every interaction, every glance, every pause. They dissected my stillness like it was a threat. They turned my restraint into a prophecy. And I let them, because when enemies fear you, they begin to make mistakes for you. They rush, they over-explain, they reveal themselves. Fear makes people sloppy. Fear makes people loud. Fear makes people predictable. I didn't have to expose them. They did it themselves. All I did was wait. Silence isn't empty. Silence is a canvas, and I let them paint their worst nightmares across it. They filled the gaps with dread. They filled the pauses with paranoia. They filled the unknown with monsters of their own design. I never had to threaten. I never had to warn. I let them imagine. And imagination is far crueler than reality. They started to see patterns that weren't there, connections I never made, plans I never announced, and that's the beauty of silence. It lets your enemies dig without knowing how deep they're going. Every rumor they spread made them look over their shoulder. Every theory they invented tightened the noose around their own minds. They asked questions no one could answer. And unanswered questions breed fear. What does he know? What is he waiting for? Why isn't he reacting? They couldn't stand it, because silence doesn't argue, it doesn't defend, it doesn't flinch. Silence just watches, and being watched terrifies people who live on lies. They wanted a reaction, they wanted anger, they wanted reassurance. I gave them none, I gave them space, and in that space fear grew teeth. I watched them turn on each other, blame each other, suspect each other. Fear fractures alliances faster than any attack. They didn't trust the room anymore. They didn't trust their words. They didn't trust themselves, all because I said nothing. I became a shadow they couldn't outrun, a question that wouldn't resolve, a presence that refused to clarify, and clarity is comfort, so I took it away. They began to confess without being asked, to justify without accusation, to defend without attack. Fear pulled the truth out of them piece by piece. I didn't interrogate, I didn't accuse, I listened. And listening is power. Silence sharpened my understanding. It showed me who cracked under pressure, who talked too much, who lied poorly. Fear stripped them naked. While they were busy managing their panic, I was learning their habits, their weaknesses, their breaking points. They thought I was inactive. I was collecting everything. They thought they were being cautious. They were broadcasting. Fear makes people leak information. Ego makes them brag. Panic makes them careless. I let all of it happen. I let them believe the silence meant danger was coming. Because when people expect an attack, they exhaust themselves preparing for it. They burned energy. They burned trust. They burned time. I conserved all three. I didn't need to strike. They were already bleeding. Silence became my battlefield. Fear became my weapon. I didn't push them into graves. I let them dig. Every assumption was another shovel. Every rumor another scoop of dirt. Every sleepless night another foot deeper. They dug faster the longer I said nothing. Because silence doesn't reassure. It doesn't calm, it waits. And waiting is unbearable for those who fear being exposed. They wanted resolution. I gave them suspense. They wanted closure. I gave them anticipation. They wanted certainty. I gave them doubt. And doubt is poison. It eats at confidence. It erodes unity. It rots courage from the inside. I didn't need to dominate physically. I dominated psychologically. Because fear doesn't require presence. It works even when you're gone. Even when I wasn't there, they felt me. In every quiet room, in every unanswered message, in every delayed response, I became a constant, unseen, unspoken, unavoidable, and the more they feared me, the more powerful I became, not because I demanded it, but because they gave it to me. Fear handed me authority. Fear crowned me without announcement. I didn't need followers. I had impact. I didn't need loyalty. I had influence. I didn't need to explain my intentions. Their fear explained them for me. That's the final evolution of silence. Not absence, not restraint, control. When you master silence, you no longer fight enemies. You let them fight themselves. You let their minds turn inward. You let their fear cannibalize their strength. And when the moment finally comes, when the silence breaks, it doesn't need to be loud. Because by then, the war is already over. I let them fill the silence with fear. And fear did exactly what I needed it to do. They finally understand. But not before it's over, not before the cracks appear, not before the silence that they mocked becomes the storm that swallows them whole. Too late, they see it now. The truth they ignored, the presence they dismissed, the patience they underestimated. And now it terrifies them. They thought I was waiting. They thought I was hesitating. They thought I was silent because I had nothing to say. They were wrong. Every pause was strategy. Every glance withheld was reconnaissance. Every unspoken word was a weapon sharpening itself in the quiet of my mind. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. I moved while they were busy talking. I planned while they were busy judging. I built while they were busy mocking. They confused my stillness for surrender, my patience for weakness, my silence for fear. Now they understand what they should have feared all along. I was never passive. I was never lost. I was never unsure. I was preparing every step, every thought. Every second of quiet, calculated, measured, perfected, too late to ask, too late to stop me. They see the predator now, the shadow they ignored, the presence that lingered in the corners of their vision. The one they called insignificant. I am here. I am everything they didn't expect. I am the consequence of their arrogance. They try to scramble. They try to rally. They try to fight back. But I am already beyond their reach. Already beyond their comprehension, already beyond the point where their words matter. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. I built my strength in silence. I forged my mind in the fires of their disbelief. I sharpened my resolve on the edge of their doubt. I waited for this moment, for them to finally see, for them to finally realize. Too late. Look at them, confused, panicked, fractured. They thought they were watching me. They thought they were in control. They thought they understood. They were wrong. Every misstep they made, I anticipated. Every rumor they spread, I used. Every plan they crafted, I unraveled before it began. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. The silence that once seemed empty, the calm that seemed harmless, was never emptiness, was never calm. It was preparation, it was power, it was inevitability. And now the inevitable has arrived. I do not need to strike. I do not need to warn. I do not need to justify. They see it for themselves. The truth, the consequence, the reckoning, too late to ask. Too late to stop me. They hear the echoes of their own misjudgment. They feel the weight of their own arrogance. They realize the cost of every moment they ignored me, and it is crushing, and it is irreversible, and it is final, too late. I do not celebrate their fear. I do not relish their panic. I simply observe, because the lesson was always mine to give. The stage was always set. The outcome was always certain. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. They are witnesses now. Witnesses to the result of underestimating a mind that refused to yield. Witnesses to the consequences of mocking a spirit that refused to break. Every glance they cast, filled with dread. Every word they attempt, trembling. Every step they take, tentative, uncertain, weighed by the silence they cannot escape. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. I am the echo of their misjudgment. I am the shadow of their doubt. I am the storm they refuse to see coming, and they cannot undo it. They cannot outrun it. They cannot comprehend it in time. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. I am not their enemy. I am their consequence. I am the result of every slight they offered. Every laugh they cast my way, every dismissal of my presence. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. They thought they could contain me. They thought they could predict me. They thought they could survive me. They were wrong. I have been silent while they spoke, still while they rushed, calm while they panicked. And now they see, too late. I do not need approval. I do not need agreement. I do not need their understanding. I exist. I persist. I dominate. Too late to ask. Too late to stop me. This is the reward of patience. This is the power of preparation. This is the victory of silence that was never weakness. They finally understand. Too late to ask. Too late to stop me. And I step forward. I do not run. I do not falter. I do not hesitate. Because the war was never theirs to win. The battlefield was always mine. The outcome was always inevitable. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. I let them realize too late. I let them witness too late. I let them crumble too late. Because silence is not absence. Silence is power. Silence is dominion. And in the end, it always wins. Too late to ask, too late to stop me. I didn't disappear. I vanished from their sight. But absence is not emptiness. I was becoming, not what they wanted, not what they feared, but something beyond both. Every whisper they uttered, every glance they threw in judgment, every sneer that passed over my silence, it became fuel. I retreated, I folded into the shadows, I hid in plain sight, and while they celebrated my silence, I built a fortress of thought, a weapon of patience, a mind sharpened into a blade that no one could predict. Do you see the power of stillness, the violence of quiet? The terror that blooms when the world assumes you are nothing. I am not nothing. I am the storm that waited in the calm. I am the shadow that moves while the world screams. I am the echo they never heard until it became a roar. They thought I was broken. They thought I had surrendered. They thought my silence was defeat. Fools. Every day they doubted me, I grew stronger. Every insult they whispered, I stored it like ammunition. Every hand that pushed me down, I turned into leverage. Every mocking laugh, I transformed into rhythm, into cadence, into a pulse that beats only in the chamber of the vigilant. I didn't disappear. I became the silence that whispers before the storm. I became the quiet in the room that makes even the boldest hearts hesitate. I became the calm in which predators drown in their own arrogance. I became inevitability. Do you feel it? The weight of a presence unseen, unchallenged, unstoppable. I am not measured by applause. I am not defined by recognition. I am defined by the truth that waits for no one. That power is not loud. It is silent. It is steady. It is absolute. I am the hand that shapes destiny while the world debates my meaning. I am the fire that burns in shadow. I am the predator that waits while the herd runs blind. And now I step into myself. The silence fractures, the stillness erupts. The unseen becomes undeniable. I am not who I was, I am more, I am beyond. I am not a victim of whispers, I am the author of echoes. I am not the shadow you chased. I am the figure that follows your fear. I am not lost, I am becoming. I am the proof that absence breeds power. I am the living, breathing inevitability that no one could imagine. And when I move, when I claim what I built in silence, they will understand. Too late to stop me, too late to undo what they ignored, too late to challenge the storm that waited and now rises. I didn't disappear. I became everything they never saw coming. I became unstoppable. I became unstoppable. The era of UNDRSTMATI, foundation of pain, the noise that never heard me, they spoke. I listened, I remembered, I was present, capable, ready, but invisible. The world adored noise, validation, the shallow echo of power. And I was a shadow in a room full of mirrors. They mocked me, they dismissed me. They assumed silence was weakness. But I learned quickly the quiet carries its own weight. They spoke. I listened, I remembered, they didn't see me. And that was my first advantage. I learned early that silence scares no one. At first, as a child, I spoke and was punished. I was quiet and I survived. Silence became armor, not surrender. Every glance, every whisper, every empty stare, I stored it all. It was the beginning. The forging. The world feared loudness. I feared exposure. So I learned silence protects, silence observes, silence waits. They confused my stillness for surrender. They laughed. I watched. They mistook patience for defeat. Rivals grew louder, crueler, reckless. I noted patterns, weaknesses, hesitations. Predators assume a sleeping dragon is dead. They were wrong, and I waited. Internal war, the silent battle, the war I fought where no one clapped. I battled shadows. I battled doubt. No applause, no audience, no rescue. Every scar, every loss, every sleepless night unseen. I bled in a soundproof room. Silence was heavy, but necessary. I faced myself in the quiet and survived. Every unspoken word turned into a blade I didn't speak. I sharpened. Anger became focus. Pain became ammunition. Every insult, every betrayal, stored, refined, ready. Pressure forged steel, and I became steel, silent, deadly, waiting. I almost became the person they wanted me to be. I flirted with surrender. I almost apologized for existing. I almost shrank. Silence nearly turned inward, poisoned. But I survived the temptation. I remembered I am not theirs to shape. I am mine. The realization, the turning point. Then I realized silence is not absence, it's control. Silence chooses when to strike. Loud people reveal themselves, silent people observe. Control belongs to those who do not rush to speak. I realized the quiet is not weakness, it is dominance, and I held it. While they spoke, I studied their weaknesses. They leaked fear. Ego bled in their words. I observed. I memorized. Hunters reveal their tracks while the prey remains unseen. Silence is uncertainty. And uncertainty is power. My silence became a mirror they couldn't escape. I said nothing. They unraveled. Their fears, doubts, and paranoia reflected back at them. I was still water. They saw monsters in themselves, and I smiled quietly. The power shift, fear awakns. Now they're watching me instead of laughing, the laughter stopped. Attention replaced mockery. Rooms tense at my quiet, footsteps echo when the predator stops running. I was no longer prey. I was the storm. Silence makes weak minds invent stories they don't know, and it terrifies them. Rumors, theories, fear, silence is myth, silence is legend, silence is terror, and I let it breathe. I no longer need to explain myself, I do not justify, I do not negotiate. Explanation is weakness. Silence asserts authority. Power no longer asks permission. Like a king who doesn't announce his crown, I wear mine anyway. Dominance, the villain awakens. My quiet presence is louder than their screams. I don't speak. I arrive. Stillness commands rooms. Others stammer. Others falter. The weight of presence cannot be shouted. It is felt. I arrive, and the world knows it. I let them fill the silence with fear. I watch. I wait. Their fear does my work for me. Silence is a weapon. I let them dig their own graves, and they do without my hand. They finally understand, too late to ask, too late to stop me. Their realization comes not as a warning, but as defeat. Silence was preparation, not hesitation. And now the game is mine. I didn't disappear, I was becoming. I didn't disappear. I vanished from their sight, but absence is not emptiness. I was becoming, not what they wanted, not what they feared, something beyond both. Every whisper, every glance, every sneer fuel. I retreated. I hid in plain sight. And while they celebrated my silence, I built a fortress of thought, a weapon of patience. A mind sharpened into a blade that no one could predict. I am not measured by applause. I am defined by truth. I am the storm that waited in the calm. I am the shadow that moves while the world screams. I am the inevitability they never saw coming. I didn't disappear. I became unstoppable. Your silence is making them question everything. Look at yourself. Do you hear that quiet? Do you feel it? It's not absence. It's not emptiness. It is power. Your silence is a blade. Your silence is a shield. Your silence is the storm they never saw coming. Every word you don't say, every reaction you withhold, every glance you let pass, it's a seed planted in their minds, a seed of doubt, a seed of fear, a seed of uncertainty, and they are starving for certainty. They are desperate for explanation. They are hungry for control. And you give them none, you give them silence. They speak, they move, they plot, and you do not, you wait, you watch. You let their own minds betray them. Do you see it? Their eyes flicker, their words falter, their confidence breaks, their arrogance crumbles. You did nothing and yet everything. Your presence is loud, your absence is louder. You do not shout, you do not plead, you do not justify, you exist. And in that existence they question everything, every assumption, every claim, every certainty they held. Your silence is the mirror they cannot avoid, the mirror that shows them their weakness, their fear, their insignificance. And when they look, when they finally see, they realize you are untouchable. They realize you were always in control. They realize they never knew what power looked like, because power does not scream, power does not rush, power does not explain, power waits. Power watches, power strikes only when the moment is right, and your silence is the harbinger of that strike. They do not understand it yet, they do not see it coming, but they feel it. Every room you enter, they feel the weight of it. Every conversation you avoid, they feel the emptiness of it. Every reaction you deny, they feel the restraint of it, and they cannot escape it. Your silence is strategy. Your silence is identity. Your silence is supremacy. They will try to fill it. They will try to name it. They will try to break it. But you hold the quiet. You hold the calm. You hold the storm. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them crumble. Your silence does the work for you. Let them fear it. Let them question it. Let them worship it. Because your silence is louder than their noise. Your silence is sharper than their swords. Your silence is more dangerous than their lies. And in that silence, you are immortal. You are untouchable. You are unstoppable. You do not explain. You do not justify. You do not bend. You do not break. You do not wait for permission. You do not wait for approval. You do not wait for applause. You do not wait. You exist. And that is enough. Your silence makes them question everything. Your silence exposes everything. Your silence destroys everything they built to feel safe. You are the storm they feared. You are the shadow they could not follow. You are the truth they refused to see. And when they finally understand, it will be too late to ask, too late to stop, too late to survive, because silence is dominance. Silence is power. Silence is you. Own it, claim it, let it rise, let it burn. Let it speak louder than any scream ever could. Your silence makes them question everything. Your silence makes them fear everything. Your silence makes them irrelevant. And in that quiet, in that stillness, you are infinite, you are legendary, you are unstoppable. I rise without a word, no trumpet, no herald, no excuse. I do not announce. I arrive. The world notices, not because I demand it, not because I plead, but because stillness carries weight heavier than screams. Every step I take echoes. Every glance I spare leaves doubt. Every breath reminds them that silence is a weapon they cannot resist. I do not need to speak. I do not need to justify. I do not need to prove. The air bends, the ground listens, and the ones who thought they knew tremble. I am not a storm. I am the quiet before it. I am the shadow in the corner of their certainty. I am the pause that unravels their arrogance. They look for cracks. They search for weakness. They wait for motion. But I do not move for them. I do not yield to expectation. I do not conform to fear. The world shifts, not around me, but because I choose the moment to exist. I do not shout, I do not warn, I do not explain, and yet the tremors begin. Every empire built on noise falters when silence walks. Every tyrant built on hubris falters when stillness waits. Every mind built on certainty falters when it cannot hear the approach of inevitability. I rise without a word. And the world notices, they wonder, they question, they hesitate. Fear creeps in, not loud, not frantic, but patient, knowing, consuming, because I have become the thing they cannot predict, the force they cannot name, the presence they cannot escape. They confused my stillness for surrender. They laughed, they mocked. They thought patience was weakness. They grew louder, crueler, reckless, blind to the truth. I was watching. I observed their patterns, their cracks, their flaws. They mistook my stillness for defeat. A sleeping dragon, they said, a corpse, they whispered, but I was not broken. I was waiting, I was learning. Every word they wasted, every foolish act. I stored, I remembered, I sharpened. They laughed, I watched, they roared, I waited, they assumed, I prepared. Patience is a predator's weapon. And I was the predator they could not see. The war I fought where no one clapped, I bled in silence. I fought battles that no one applauded. No crowd, no rescue, no recognition. Depression whispered lies, doubt clawed at me. Self-questioning became a daily opponent. I was alone, trapped in a soundproof room of my own creation. Every strike I took echoed only to me. Every wound was unseen. But silence became necessary. Pain became fuel. Weakness became strategy. I realized the war I fought was internal. It was not about others. It was about mastering myself. It was about surviving when no one cared. And I did. I endured. I grew stronger. Every unspoken word turned into a blade I didn't speak. I sharpened. Every thought, every unvoiced outrage became ammunition. Every injustice endured became steel forged under pressure. I did not waste anger, I refined it. Pain stored like ammunition. Silence, the whetstone of my will. I didn't cry, I sharpened. I didn't scream, I sharpened. I didn't bow, I sharpened. The world thought I was quiet. I was becoming lethal. Every unspoken word, every restrained fury was a blade they could not see. I almost became the person they wanted me to be. I almost apologized for existing. I almost shrank. Temptation whispered, surrender your identity, wear their armor, speak their words, be their image, but something inside me rebelled. Silence almost turned inward, poisoned my mind. I almost became small, but I refused. I realized their vision of me was not mine. Their expectation was a cage, and I refused the bars. I did not apologize. I did not shrink. I did not bow. Then I realized silence is not absence, it's control. Silence is not emptiness. It is power. It is dominance. The loudest reveal themselves. The silent observe. The one who waits controls. Silence chooses when to strike. Silence shapes the room. Silence bends the mind of those who cannot read it. And I am the master of this quiet. I do not rush. I do not speak. I do not act until the moment is mine. While they spoke, I studied their weaknesses. They exposed everything in their noise. Ego leaked, fear leaked, pride crumbled. I watched, I noted, I calculated, every movement a clue, every word a sign. Like hunters, they revealed their tracks. Like prey, I remained unseen. The more they shouted, the clearer I became. The more they believed they knew, the more blind they were. I waited, I learned, I sharpened. My silence became a mirror they couldn't escape. I said nothing. They unraveled. In the stillness, they faced themselves. Their fears, their doubts, their insecurities projected onto the void. I am the reflection they cannot escape. A monster in the water, and they stare into it, trembling. Every question they posed, every rumor they spread, every accusation they threw, it returned to them. I said nothing. They unraveled. Now they're watching me. Instead of laughing, the laughter stopped. Attention replaced mockery. Silence built tension that no noise could break. Like footsteps echoing after the predator stops running, they noticed me. Every eye followed. Every heartbeat tightened. The tables turned without a single strike. They do not move carelessly around me anymore. They do not speak with confidence. They watch, they wait, and they fear. Silence makes weak minds invent stories they do not understand. They do not see. They invent rumors, theories, fear. Every silence I keep becomes a story they cannot verify. They fear what they cannot read. They fear what they cannot control. They fear me. They don't know, and it terrifies them. They do not understand, and it terrifies them. They cannot touch me, and it terrifies them. Silence becomes myth, and I am the legend in the making. I no longer need to explain myself. I owe no one a word. I ask no permission. I explain nothing. To explain is weakness. To justify is vulnerability. I do not seek validation. My silence asserts authority. Power requires no consent. I am a king who does not announce his crown. I am the ruler of a world that does not yet know it bends to me. My quiet presence is louder than their screams. I do not speak. I arrive. Stillness commands the room. Others fumble in my shadow. Every nervous glance, every hesitation is acknowledgement of power. I do not shout. I do not threaten. I do not need to. I am the quiet before collapse. I am the calm that shatters certainty. I am the presence that cannot be ignored. I let them fill the silence with fear. Fear works for me. I do not manufacture it. I let it grow, nurtured by their own imagination. They dig their own graves in my absence. They whisper, they speculate, they falter, all without a single command from me. Silence is fully weaponized. Their terror is my shield. Their doubt is my sword. They finally understand. Too late the realization hits. Not now, not yesterday, but now. Silence was not hesitation. Silence was preparation. Too late to ask. Too late to stop me. Too late to know what was coming. I have already become. I have already struck. I have already won in ways they cannot comprehend. I didn't disappear. I was becoming. I was not absent. I was transforming. Every quiet moment, every unseen struggle, every unspoken thought was a cocoon. I shed weakness. I embraced power. Silence became my chrysalis. Pain became my catalyst. And now I emerge. I am more than they imagined, more than they feared, more than anyone dared to witness. Your silence is making them question everything. You, too, can wield this power. Your silence is strategy. Your quiet is strength. Your restraint is identity. Each pause is a question mark they cannot answer. Each omission is a chain they cannot break. Each stillness is a mirror reflecting their insecurities back at them. Your silence is the virus in their certainty. Your calmness is the storm they cannot predict. Your restraint is the king they cannot dethrone. Silence commands, silence dictates, silence transforms. I rise without a word, and the world trembles. I rise without a word. No trumpet, no herald, no excuse. I arrive. The world notices, not because I demand it, but because silence carries weight heavier than screams. Every step echoes, every glance leaves doubt. Every breath reminds them of inevitability. I do not shout, I do not warn, I do not explain. And yet the tremors begin. Let them wonder, let them fear, let them remember I was silent, and that was their warning. No ally can shield them, no counsel can prepare them. No weapon can reach me before my silence strikes. I rise, and the ground remembers my weight. The air remembers my pause. The hearts that doubted me remember my absence. I am not here to fight. I am here to exist. I am here to shift the balance without a single utterance. And when they finally realize it is too late to prepare, too late to plead, too late to resist, I do not raise my voice. I do not call their names. I do not beg for recognition. I simply rise. And the world trembles. Let them wonder. Let them fear. Let them remember I was silent, and that was their warning.